Well, I said I wouldn't do another one unless it was demanded of me. It has been officially demanded of me. So today, we're going to do a part 2 to the Rings of Power musings. And I may do a part 3 and may do a part 4. This series is incredibly important to me. It was one of my greatest inspirations to creating my own world, and I believe it's an inspiration to everybody who ever created their own fantasy world. They looked at Tolkien, they looked at his world building, and they looked at the way that he sculpted everything, the fine-tuned detail that he did. And very few people have ever managed to do just as good as he did. I pale in comparison. I am not even in a comparison. The man was a legend. He developed years of his life to doing this stuff. So I feel like I owe it to myself to continue musing about this series and why it continues to hurt the fan in me. So I can appreciate a lot of what it does, but I also am hurt by a lot that it does. But I do some research. I did a lot of research about what they had the rights to. I double checked a lot of things to see what they didn't have the rights to. And I went ahead and dug out 4 of my books from this series. I have here The Hobbit, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and, of course, The Return of the King. This is a trilogy edition that I got in a box set. I don't have the box anymore, but these are the Houghton Mifflin versions of the books. And if you look at here, it even has his own little insignia, Tolkien. That's really cool. It really is. They cared about this man. And his appendices are included in the Return of the King novel. I'll leave The Hobbit up because this looks amazing. I've read this thing so many times as a kid. Now, in here, we have, as you can see, Appendix A. And all of this is the rest of his appendices. This was what he wrote down. The Annals of Kings and Rulers is part A. And we'll look at that for a second, because these are what they have the rights to. This is what they had the rights to in order to build their lore. I'm going to read various sentences and passages. This is not monetized, so I'm not going to do anything like that, so whatever, I don't care about that. We're just going to read some of these things here. Eros chose to be of mankind. That's right. It fit. They did that in the show. Let's see, where else? Eros is the first king of Numenor. They got that right. His descendants were long-lived but mortal. Again, that is true. Later, when they became powerful, they begrudged the choice of their forefather, desiring the immortality within the life of the world that was the fate of the Eldar. Which is an interesting thing, considering half Elros, half Elven, chose to be counted among the elves. His son would be considered half Elven, and that child would also be able to choose to be between immortality and immortality. And since Elros chose to be of the mortals when Elros wed another mortal, the son, the child, would be immortal. They would not have the choice to be considered amongst the immortals of the Eldar or whatever. And that's something that they would be jealous of, and I feel like they missed an opportunity to talk about that. What else is here? In this way began their rebellion, which, under the evil teaching of Sauron, brought about the downfall of Numenor in the ruin of the ancient world, as is told in the Akallabeth. Okay, so the Akallabeth is in the another book, so they don't have the rights to that. But they have a line of kings here, and they do have the rights to that. They have the names of Tar Palantir or Tar Miriel, but the king's nephew usurped the throne. So here we go. Let's see, blah, blah, blah. Let's start at this sentence. In Zillidan. And Zillidan repented of the ways of the kings and changed his name to Tar Palantir, the Farsighted. Tar Palantir was the first king. After a while, that changed his name back to, I think the language is a Sindarin-Kenyan name style. Prior to Tar Palantir, for a while, the names were in a Duniac tongue, which is why they're called Ar-Gmilzor or Ar-Insilidon, you know? But they changed their names. Tar Palantir changed his name to Tar Palantir after that because he wanted to be counted among the elf friends, the faithful, because he was one of the faithful. His daughter should have been the fourth queen, which means there were 3 queens prior to this, Tarmiriel, but the king's nephew usurped the scepter and became Ar-Pharazôn the Golden, the last king of the Númenóreans. So they may be doing that. Ar-Pharazôn may usurp the throne, but I don't know where the golden part is in the show. In the days of Tarlandale, okay, they skip a lot here, because this is just about the line of kings. They're just about the line of kings here. So that's it for that. Let's take a look at the Appendix B and see what else they have access to. And we're back. I found Appendix B here. And it's right around here. The first age we don't have access to. They don't have access to any of that. We have access to the second age. It ended with the first overthrow of Sauron. The second age ended with this, which means it began with the end of the War of Wrath. These were the second age. These were the dark years for the men of Middle-earth, but the years of glory for Númenor. Which means the middlemen, Middle-earth, middlemen, Númenor, high men, Edain. The high men of Númenor, this was their golden age, which means for the races of man in Middle-earth, they're going through some hard times. And I'm guessing, and I gather they're doing it right there. As you can see, the people in the Southlands are looking pretty worse for wear, except for a certain someone who looks a little bit too clean. In the beginning of this age, many of the High Elves still remained. Most of these dwelt in Lindon, west of the Eredluin. But before the building of Barad-dûr, many of the Sinnar passed eastward, and some established realms in the forests far away, where their people were mostly Sylvan elves. Thranduil, king of the north of Greenwood the Great, was one of these, blah, 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 blah. So Thranduil, you got him, he's still around. Lindon, north of Lune, Gil-galad, last heir of the kings of the Noldor in exile. So, most of the lords of Noldor, after the War of Wrath, were allowed to return. Galadriel and Gil-galad of the Noldor decided to stay in Middle-earth, with the rest, a bulk of the Noldor returning to the west, considering Beleriand is gone and all that stuff, so a lot of them went back west. But some of them stayed here. They stayed in Lindon under King Gil-galad. In Lindon dwelt, for a time, Celeborn, kinsman of Thingol. His wife was Galadriel, greatest of elven women. Now, there you go. You have this in your literal appendices, Celeborn's name and his wife, Galadriel. So, they're leaving Celeborn out, I guess. Maybe he's somewhere else. Maybe he's in a prisoner somewhere. Maybe somebody imprisoned him, and she's got to go see. I don't know. But that's insulting to the character of Celeborn to do that to him. But, whatever. She was the sister of Finrod. They got that correct. Friend of men. Once king of Nargothrond, who gave his life to save Beren, son of Barahir. Well, I guess they kind of smudged that part, too. Let's see. Later, some of the Noldor went to Eregion, upon the west of the Misty Mountains, near the west gate of Moria. This they did because they learned that Mithril had been discovered in Moria. Okay, so the elves were interested in Mithril. They were interested in that. So, I guess just because this one sentence, Gil-galad will come up with the legend of the Hitraiglir. The Noldor were great craftsmen. This is true. Fëanor of the Noldor and the ears of the trees, created the Silmarils. You know, he's like, the Fëanor is like the greatest of all of them. You see, when the elves that went to Aman, the Noldor, they were like the high elves, the great elves, because they went to Valinor. When they came back to Middle-earth, they were considered great elves, the high elves, the greatest of the elven kind in Middle-earth, because the Sindar, these guys did not complete their journey to Aman, to Valinor. They were lesser elves compared to the Noldor. That's why, compared to Galadriel, Celeborn did not look so great, though he was a great warrior in his own merit. Blah, 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 blah. The Noldor were great craftsmen and less unfriendly to the dwarves than the Sindar. The Sindar elves were not friends of the dwarves because of what happened to Thingol. And as we looked over here, Thingol's name is mentioned in the Second Age, his appendixes, you know. So they have the rights to that name, to use Thingol, to use a sort of prejudice that the Sindar elves have against the dwarves. And Elrond is a descendant of Thingol. He's a direct descendant of Thingol. He is counted among the elf lords. He is royalty! But they smudged that over, I guess. But friendship that grew between the people of Durin and the elven smiths of Eregion was the closest that there ever was or has been between the two races. Celebrimbor was Lord of Eregion. There you go, his name is actually canon. You know, people were actually wondering if this man was actually a canon character when Shadow of Mordor came out, you know. And they're like, ooh, is this Celebrimbor? Did he actually make the rings? And then we looked at the appendices and all that other stuff, or the other books and all that stuff. The casual fans who just saw the movies and all that stuff, they were like, oh, he does exist! Okay. So there he is, there's his name. And he was Lord of the Region. So for their merit, they got that corrected. He is descended from Fëanor. He's Fëanor's grandson, I believe. And that's the funny thing. That is a funny thing between Celebrimbor and Elrond. Elrond is both the direct descendant to King Thingol, but he's also a direct descendant to Fingolfin, Fëanor's half-brother. I think it's a major missed opportunity to have Celebrimbor and Elrond kind of butt heads and disagree with each other on a lot of things, kind of like the Fëanor-Fingolfin archetype, because they're descended from both of them. Maybe there's some bad blood between the two, you know? And maybe there could have been some bad blood between Elrond and the dwarves. Maybe Elrond would be a little bit prejudiced against the dwarves for what happened to Thingol, because he's technically both a Noldor and descended from Sindar as well. So there's that. Technically, he's also descended from Maiar, considering Thingol's wife. But hey, let's get that out of the way. Okay, we have years. This is a timeline. We have the timeline of the years. So, year 1, Foundation of the Grey Havens, Ant of Linden. Blah, 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 blah. The Edain reached Numenor. Many dwarves leaving their old cities to go to Moria, as well as numbers. Sauron begins to stay in Middle-earth around the year 500. Now, we know that the TV show compressed the timeline, so this means absolutely fucking nothing. All this means nothing, but the reason why I'm reading through it is to see if they got anything actually accurate, you know? So let's take a look. Sauron, alarmed by the growing power of the Númenóreans, chooses Mordor as a land to make into a stronghold, became building of Barad-dûr. So Mordor was starting to be taken over by Sauron in the early part of the Second Age, even before the rings were even crafted, before the Lord of Gifts, before all of that, you know, he was doing this in Mordor there. So, but they're compressing the timeline though, so whatever. There's no Adar either, so by the way. Sauron endeavors to seduce the Eldar. Gil-galad refuses to treat with him. Okay, so there's no name of Anatar. So Sauron, they don't have the rights to the name Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. That was in another book that they don't have the rights to. But they do have the rights to Sauron trying to seduce the Eldar first. He tries to do this first in the year 1200. He tries to seduce the Eldar first because he believes that they are the bigger of the two villains here. But he's also a man of control, so he wants to, like, control the elves. He wants to control rather than just destroy, but, you know, if he can't control you, he'll blow you up, you know, whatever. So, Gil-galad refuses to treat with him, but the Smiths of Eregion are won over. The Númenóreans begin to make permanent havens. The year 1500, 300 years later, the elven smiths are instructed by Sauron, reach the height of their skill. This was the golden age of Eregion between the year 1200 and 1500, the golden age of Eregion and of Khazad-dûm because of their cooperations. They forged the Rings of Power at the end of the 1500, at the start of the 1500. The 3 rings are completed at the end of the 1500s. Celebrimbor, it does not say that he forges them in secret, it just says that they are forged last, second to last. The One Ring is forged last. Now, when in the prologue to Fellowship of the Rings, Galadriel has her whole story where she says 7 were given to the Dwarf Lords. There's that number 7 was to represent the 7 clans, and I thought that was really nicely done. The 7 clans, I can't remember the exact names, but Durin's folk were one of those clans, the Longbeards. The rest of them are some of the things, the Ironfoots or whatever, you know, but there's that, that's fine. That's why 7 were given to them and 9 were given to the races of men. Blah, 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 blah. Here we go. In the year 1600, 100 years after the Rings of Power starting to be made, he forges the One Ring in the Ordruin of Mount Doom. Celebrimbor starts to perceive the designs of Sauron after he creates the 3 rings. So there's that. The War of the Elves and Sauron begins at the end of the 1600s in 1693. The 3 rings are hidden from Sauron. Sauron's forces invade Eriador, possibly for those 3 rings. Gil-galad sends Elrond to Eregion, blah, blah, blah. Eregion is laid waste. Celebrimbor dies. At the end of the 1600s, the gates of Moria are shut. They will not reopen until the Fellowship opens the door. The remnant of the Noldor founds the refuge of Imladris. Sauron overruns Eriador, Tar Minastor. Now, if you looked here in the Appendix A, the Line of Kings, throughout here they say that Tar Minastor is the nephew of Queen Tar Telperion. Queen Tar Telperion was she was unwed, she had no children, but she was the uncontested ruler of Númenor during the War of the Elves and Sauron. So I think that the show missed a great opportunity had they not compressed the timeline like this. They could have had a canon queen, uncontested ruler of Númenor. They could have had that. Telperion was the queen during the War of the Elves and Sauron. She's the one who sends the nephew, Tar Minastor, from Númenor to Lindon, and the minister's forces defeat Sauron. Sauron is driven out of Eriador. The Westlands have peace for a long while. A long while. Make that notification here. As you can see, there's a large timeline gap here. Almost 1,000 years. Blah, 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 blah. Death of Tarn, blah, blah, blah. Umbar. So, Umbar is founded some point between 1800s and 2280, I believe, because you see Umbar is made into a great fortress of Númenor at around 2280. Umbar is a very important port city to the west of Harad, North Harad, maybe South Harad, but it's a very important city, and it's pretty culturally diverse. Another missed opportunity. It's 3175, Repentance of Tar Palantir, Civil War in Numenor. They're talking about that, but they're not showing anything. 3255, Ar-Pharazôn the Golden seizes the scepter. Ar-Pharazôn sets sail and lands in Umbar in 3261. Sauron is taken as prisoner to Numenor. 3262 to 3310, Sauron seduces the king and corrupts the Numenorians. So roughly over the course of 50 years, Sauron is on Numenor doing this stuff, right? The Great Armament is built in 3310, and Pharazôn sails east to Numenor. None of this stuff has happened yet, and I don't know if any of it will happen in the way that it does, but you could take a look at this. If you ever have a copy of Return of the King, the appendices are in Return of the King. Okay, there they go. You don't need to worry about the Third Age, hasn't happened yet. But let's see if there's anything in Appendix C about this time period. As you can see, I've closed the book. There was nothing else in here that we could have found to have helped us solidify our version of the Second Age in this adaptation. But from what we have in this, it seems that the show is taking a lot of diversions, even from the very little source material they have access to. But they don't have a lot of stuff here. They don't have a lot of rights. So let's see if we could take a look through the first 5 episodes of what they could have done. The first thing they could have done is not condense the timeline. They could not have done that. You could make a 5-season, you can even make it 3 seasons, but if they want to do 5, it's the contract to do 5. They could have made 5 seasons to summarize the whole events of the Second Age. And for half of your show, you could have had one cast of human characters. And then for the other half of the show, you could have had the other cast of human characters. Here's how I would set it up. The first season should be called The Rings of Power. This is correct. This should be about Sauron going to Eregion. You don't have to worry about the Lord of Gifts part, but you could say that Sauron comes to Eregion under the disguise of somebody fair. You could say he's got a different name. You could even make up a name. Since you don't have access to Anatar, you can make up a name. But he goes to Eregion first to try to seduce Gil-galad, and Gil-galad's like, no, I don't trust you. So he goes to Eregion, where the elven smiths are, and we have Celebrimbor, who lives in the shadow of, like, one of the greatest elves of ever, all time. And he has a lot to prove. That is something that Sauron can manipulate. So he manipulates the elven smiths and their ambitions to build great things. And then the Rings of Power are forged over 300 years. These are elves. Any type of great time skips means nothing to them, okay? And we can have Durin III as the main dwarf ruler. There is no Durin IV, even though it does not exactly say when Durin IV was born and died. We do know that the Dwarven religion, through the Dwarven religion, we know that Durin the Deathless reincarnates, and every time he's reincarnated, that king is going to be named Durin the X number, all the way down to, I believe, Durin the Seventh. Durin the Seventh, I believe, was the last king of the dwarves, I believe, because it was in the Fourth Age, before the end of the world, right? He would be the last king, Durin the Seventh. It could be the 8th or 9th. I could double check. Let's double check. Because you see, that's what proper storyboarding should be done when you're making an adaptation. If you're not sure about something when you're adaptation, double check the actual source. Durin the Seventh is the last king of the dwarves. I was right. But you know, if you want to make sure, double check your stuff. So there's only one Durin. You should only have one Durin in the Second Age for the first season, right? Durin the Third. And we don't have any human characters to worry about. There's no Harfoots, and there's no mention of the hobbits. The Harfoots are hobbits. They're hobbits, okay? They're not not a separate species. No. there's 3 types of hobbits. But that's like saying you got your French, you got your Chinese, and you got your Englishmen. They're all humans! But there you go, right? There's that. But they do nothing of importance. And if they do nothing of importance, don't just create a story that deviates from your timeline of what happens in the Second Age just to create your own storyline that does F all to push the narrative, okay? You don't need it. You don't need them, so wipe them out. They're gone. They're nowhere near. They're nobody around. Your cast is going to constitute of elves, dwarves, and Sauron. Okay? Okay. So this first season should all be about Sauron and Celebrimbor and the buildings of the Rings of Power and the Golden Age of Eregion. Eregion should be a cautionary tale. Lindon should be a pale shadow in comparison to this younger kingdom of Eregion founded by the younger Celebrimbor's. Okay? This should be about Celebrimbor's ambitions, the ambitions of the Elven Smiths to recapture the might and glory that the Noldor had during the First Age. This cautionary tale of trying to recapture the power that you once held. And all that stuff, man. That's what that season should be about. And it ends with the forging of the Rings of Power. In Season 2, you can have your humans in Numenor. Season 2 can have Tar Telperion. She is the canon queen of Numenor at this time period. You can have it be about her. There should be, you can even have some conflict between the faithful and the king's men, that was starting to happen around this time, because her nephew was jealous of the elves, but he was still counted among the faithful. But Tar Minister would be like one of the last kings to be like one of the nice guys, After him, things start to get a little bad for a while. But during this time, you should have some of the little upheaval. Some people say we shouldn't help the elves, but they're envious of the elves. They're not just generally racist. They are envious of the elves because the elves are immortal, and the humans want to be immortal too, because they don't think it's fair that the elves can live forever while they have to die, They don't understand this, and they're angry at the gods for making that be the law of the land, right? That's why they turn against the Valar. That's why they hate the elves, because of that. Death. They don't like it. So, you have that political upheaval, but don't bullshit it. Don't bullshit it, okay? Just don't take it in such a big direction. Just mention it if you want. But the story is about the war of the elves and Sauron. This entire season should be about that. Sauron's sacking of Eredithor, and the besiegements, and Gil-galad asking for aid from the elves. You can have a ship of elves come into Numenor, and Tar Telperion is like, well, this is the start of the prophecies and all that stuff as you see the Rings of Power show. And maybe she could mention that stuff. I don't care. But then they bring a fleet. This is the thing that I hated that this show did, okay? Numenor is supposed to be considered the pinnacle of mankind. This is the highest that mankind has ever reached. They have never gotten this high ever since. The might of Gondor and Minas Tirith, that huge, massive, awesome Omega city, is a pale shadow compared to the might of Numenor. Especially during this time, the height of their power, the height of their glory. Their armies do not necessarily fight internally. Their armies are made for fights in the mainlands. They are a massive naval kingdom. They should have fleets of hundreds of ships, if not almost 1,000. This should be the greatest kingdom of mankind ever. And the humans in this society, even the weakest and lesserest of these humans, should be great compared to the normal middlemen of Middle-earth. Take Theoden King. He's a middleman. He is one of the Rohirrim, who are descended from the Northmen, who are middlemen. That man was amazing. He was great. Now consider that the lowest of the Númenóreans would be twice the man that Theoden King was. It's very hard to show that kind of might and power. I know it is. You have to hire a lot of extras. You have to make such incredible, awesome sceneries and sets, and Númenor should look so mighty and powerful. And the costumes should represent that. They should look extravagant. They should look very wealthy. Even the lowest should look wealthy. Nobody should look dirty. These people should look like the fabled Atlantis. A city of golden buildings, golden clothing, the wealth and might and hubris of mankind at their pinnacle. The greatest that they would ever achieve, but it was achieved through such levels of greed and hubris. It starts to corrupt them from the inside. That's that start. This was the peak that started to fall into what you would get to Pharazôn later on. It's hard to show that, I admit, but it should be easier to show something better than what they showed us. What I saw of Númenor could just be a basic city in Gondor. A basic lesser city in Gondor, even. The clothing didn't look extravagant, it looked poor. The people looked like lesser, poor, younger people than even the Gondorians of Minas Tirith looked. Okay? And in episode 5, Elendil is wearing some sort of helmet that reminds me of the Fountain Guard of Gondor. And I guess that might have been the inspiration, but it looks way too big for his head. It looks like it could fall right off. Okay? You gotta at least do some knowledge, you know? You gotta try. You gotta try. You can't just bullshit this. This is Tolkien. He deserves better than you're bullshitting it. He deserves the utmost respect, okay? You can't just bullshit his story and just make a fan fiction. If you want to do that, that's fine. Put it up on Wattpad or something. Don't make a fantastical, amazing series and expect it to radiate that way when you have it looking the way it does. There's people who have far more knowledge of medieval culture and this stuff than I do, who point and look at all of the costumes. And I can agree, even from my lesser experience, I can agree and look at these costumes and say that some of them look like you've picked them up from Party City. Give them more respect than that. Give them more attention than that. Spend more time on the costume designs. Get actual pieces of good-looking armor for these characters. And if it's too heavy for that character, for that actor, then maybe you should get a stand-in. Maybe you should get somebody who's actually strong enough to wield it. Maybe you should get somebody who's actually strong enough to carry all of that armor and weapons and weight and actually wield it competently to the viewer on screen. If you can't really do that, then maybe that actor is the wrong person for that role. I know that's not what you want to hear, but that's just how it should be told. You cast a character that's right for the role, not because you just want that person to be that person. You cast the person who looks right for the role. Ian McKellen looked right for the role of Gandalf. Viggo Mortensen, whatever, looked right for the role of Aragorn. You get people who look right for the role to go into the role. If they don't look right, then perhaps you should not cast them as this. There's a scene in the 5th season that deals with Galadriel training a bunch of upstart young pups. In the streets, where's the great training halls? Where's the great military encampments? The mighty fortresses that you would have mighty hundreds of soldiers in? Where's the army? Where is it? You're picking volunteers from nobodies. That's not what you... That's not what you do. That's not what you do. In the 4th episode, there was a line that was said that reminds me of South Park, where there's a person rabble-rising a bunch of rabble about how, since Galadriel has arrived here, she never arrived in Numenor, by the way, about how there's an elf here and that more elves will come and they'll steal their jobs. Oh, God, that hurt to hear. Oh, my goodness gracious. No! Numenor was given to the Edain, to the High Men. The elves don't even want to go here. They don't want to! The elves prefer to hang with their own kind. It's very rare when they want to hang with the humans. Even rarer that they want to hang with the dwarves. Okay? Okay. There's a scene in episode 5 that reminds me of Scary Movie 3. Elendil and this pale imitation of Isildur. Isildur wasn't just some ruddy bum who already started to look a bunch of sleaze and stuff. This wasn't some slimy, pathetic waste of a loser that would then become an even bigger loser who denied to put the ring in the fire or whatever. No! This should be just like Elendil. This man should be a hero. This man should be a mighty warrior. This man should be great. Maybe not as great as his father, but great. But they made him a loser. Maybe it's a character arc that they're deciding to work on. I will give it time, but from what I see, I am not impressed. I do not care for this decision. Not that I'm insulting them. I just don't care for this decision. Isildur is talking with his father in this scene, and Elendil is like saying, you cannot come with us to Middle-earth to fight, and Isildur is like, I have to fight, over there is where my dream is, and Elendil is like, what is your dream? In your own words. And Elendil is like, basically saying, to have a dream. In Scary Movie 3, there is a scene between Charlie Sheen and George, where Charlie Sheen asks George what his dream is, and George says, to have a dream. And George says, I have a dream. And Charlie Sheen is, what is your dream? And George says, to have a dream. It's the same scene. It's the same one. I am a major fan of this series. I may like the movies more than the books, admittedly, though this book is better than the movies. But even the Hobbit movies look better, look more like Tolkien than this series does. This series is a pale shadow, a pale imitation. I have gone off on a ramble. I have completely ignored the rest of the seasons of how I would have laid it out, because this is just... I couldn't keep quiet. I had to rant about it. That's why this is going into the rant files. This... I am blown away by it. You know, this could have been a decent fantasy series. This could have been a decent one. If you didn't call it the Rings of Power, if you didn't put the Lord of the Rings IP on it, if you changed the names of all of the characters involved that were used to be part of the Rings of Lord of the Rings, like Gil-galad, Elrond, if you changed all of their names into something else, nobody would be able to even tell if this was part of Lord of the Rings. Nobody would be able to tell. It could have been something else entirely. And that's why I feel I had to rant about this, because it doesn't even look like it's coming from this. It doesn't even look like it's from the appendices. You look, I showed you a breakdown, a basic breakdown of the appendices in the back here, and it didn't even, you know, it paled in comparison to that. They barely touched it. Not that there was a lot to go with, but there was enough to tell you 5 simple things. Each sentence its own season. Sauron goes to Eregior to corrupt the elven smiths into creating the Rings of Power. Sauron forges the One Ring in Mount Doom and returns to Eregion for the rings that Celebrimbor has forged. Eregion is sacked, Numenor routs Sauron's armies, and an era of watchful peace begins. Numenor has fallen on dark times. Ar-Pharazôn is trying to usurp the throne. He is a mighty warrior. He is a mighty general. He has fought in wars overseas, and he has come back. He is the political leader of the king's men, and a cousin of royalty in and of himself, and he has decided to forcefully marry the rightful queen of Numenor. I don't know how he does it. You could probably get creative about it. But he seduces the queen, and he marries her and usurps the scepter and takes over. Pharazôn heads to Mordor, captures Sauron, and returns home, where Sauron whispers secrets into the mind of Pharazôn. And Pharazôn falls to the dark side even further. He creates the cult of Morgoth in Numenor, and starts sacrificing the faithful to Morgoth, and things start getting terrible and terrible. But then Pharazôn starts to get old, his beard starts to get white, his hair starts to get white, the wrinkles on his face and the fear of death starts to creep into his heart. He looks to his aide, Sauron, and asks, "How do I stave off this fate?" And Sauron answers, "Go west. Immortality lays in the land of the gods. Wrest it from them." And Pharazôn launches a fleet of 1,000 ships west towards Aman to steal immortality from the gods that denied it to them. And they are all destroyed, and Numenor is sunk. The faithful and their smaller fleet leave Numenor after Pharazôn sails west. They sail east for Middle-earth. Numenor sinks, and those that stay behind are all killed. But Elendil and his sons and their clansmen, they have all come to Middle-earth and forged the kingdoms in exile of Anor and Gondor. Sauron begins to stir in the east. Gil-galad and Elendil forge an alliance to take care of him once and for all, and it ends with the deaths of the mighty kings of Gil-galad and Elendil in a mighty 2-on-1 match between Sauron and Isildur. Finishes him off, takes the ring, and leave it at that. Just end it there. You open again the Fellowship of the Ring with Isildur saying no. He will not toss the ring away, and that is that. There's your 5 seasons. You don't need the Harfoots. You don't need some story about Mithril. You don't need the elves are going to steal our jobs. You don't need that. You don't need some made-up daughter of Elendil. You don't need this Southlands war. You don't need to show the wizard Gandalf. You have plenty of material in these 5 seasons that I just laid out for you. You have plenty of material right there. And you also have plenty of room to get creative with it, because there's not a lot in here other than just the timeline of events. I have 5 major events for you. You could have gotten creative with that. I guess it was too hard. Well, there we go. We are 43, almost 44 minutes into this. I may make a part 3, I may make a part 4. But again, I will say it, only if it's demanded of me shall I return to this. Oh boy. I hope all of you aspiring writers out there, all of you created already writers out there, I hope you are far more imaginative than what we've gotten here. I hope if you ever adapt something like this, if you ever get the opportunity to adapt something like this, you look back on the source material and you respect the heck out of it. You respect the heck out of what this person did, what they created, what they strived for, how they wrote people to look, how they wrote people to act. I hope you respect that. And when you're casting characters, you cast characters that fit that description. You cast characters that fit that description. You create sets that fit those descriptions. You can get creative in some loopholes here and there, but things like the Harfoots are like a major loophole that you're trying to fill up, and it just doesn't feel like it's needed. It just feels like it's distracting us from storylines that really, really needed more time, that needed more fleshing out. But because we have so much stuff going on, it feels like nothing's happening in each episode, because we keep swapping to different groups of characters that they don't have time to do anything, so nothing gets done! If this entertains you, then this video has succeeded. If you have wasted 45 to 46 minutes of your life listening to this rant, thank you. This has just been for entertainment purposes and for my need to rant about this. I do not intend to ever, like, claim money off of this stuff, because as a fan, I feel that's wrong. We can fandomize, we can nerd out, we can talk about these things all we like, right? We can look through the books, we can look through the games, we can look through the movies, we can discuss them all we like, but I feel like it's kind of wrong to try to take a piece of the pie out of that, you know, for yourself. I feel like it's wrong. But whatever, I don't know how to end these things, that's why I keep rambling. Whatever. Be imaginative.